So, as a US citizen, there's a couple of things you need to know when you move to Japan. First of all, it's very different in terms of the arrangements and process. Second of all, it's the taxes. Oh boy, the taxes is crazy. So, if you don't know, as a US citizen, you're required to file taxes to the IRS every single year without fail, if you have income. If you don't have income, maybe not, but it's tricky. But for the most part, you have to file. Not only that, you have to file in the country you live in. So you essentially you're gonna file two tax returns every year, and that is ridiculous, right? Oh, but get this. Not only that, there's certain things that you can do and you cannot do when you are in the country. For example, because US is the world police, including your financial accounts around the world. Almost every country, not every country, but a lot of countries have to report back to US. So a bank that's in a foreign country have to send your information to the IRS. So in a way, you cannot escape taxes. So from that perspective, it's very strict. So the US citizens are in a way kind of watched, if you look at it that way. So a couple of things to keep in mind is, for example, in Japan, you're not allowed to invest in US securities in a lot of different brokerages, mainly because of the filing and the other stuff around that is very complicated for brokerages. So a lot of brokerages will not let you even open an account or let you invest in your assets. Fine, you think I can just invest in Japanese assets, right? Wrong. You could, but it makes things more complicated. So anytime you invest in a security that's not US based, you get taxed or you labeled as PFIC, I believe. So what happened is that you have to file a separate way of reporting on your gains and losses for that type of security because no longer domestic, it's foreign purchase. You can buy a domestic created security that invests in foreign assets, that's fine. But when you invest directly in foreign assets, that causes a lot of trouble. And sometimes the filing is so complicated, complex, that it eats away all the gains that you have. It makes no sense, right? Another thing is the cryptocurrency. So in the US, cryptocurrency are treated as securities, but not in Japan. Japan, they treat that as miscellaneous income. So what that means is you get taxed up to 55% of your gains. And not it. Also, if you have any losses, it does not carry over. So what that means, if you lose a lot and make a lot in the next year, nobody can even it out, right? No, in Japan, if you lose a lot the first year, well, it resets. You pay tax on all the gains later. So in a way, it's very difficult. So and all these different things, I didn't really consider. I thought it's not an issue until you move to a different country. I was like, oh my God, this it's crazy. So I can see why a lot of people decide to renounce their citizenship because of that. If you think about it, you're paying the world tax. Now, going further away, yeah, that's the one thing. Another thing to keep in mind is paperwork. Uh, you'll realize why Japan loves paperwork, or why Japan still has a lot of printing business, mainly because there's a lot of paperwork, and you need physical paperwork to prove it for the most part. So let's put it that way. So every time you move in Japan, you have to register your move and leave the move. So you have to go to one city to the next. You go to one city to tell you're moving in. We move to a different city. You go to original city, so you're moving out. Take that proof, that paper, right, and move to a different city to prove it. Now, Japan's getting better with new system, trying to automate systems, but for the most part, you have to move out at the current city, get that confirmation, then go. No online process, has to be in person. So there's the tax thing, the move things, and not all. And to get this, the income tax is also very high. Once you get to 100, well, let's put it in perspective, because of currency exchange rates, it can change. So over $18 million, you're at the 50% tax rate already, and that's not including other taxes that we usually have, like FICA, Social Security, and everything. So income tax is at 50%. So there's almost like no incentive for a lot of people to go beyond that, because every cent you make goes to the government, right? So there's all these financial things you gotta consider. And so one of my Japanese friends actually tells me, if you are rich, don't stay in Japan, because you will never become satisfied, or you'll be very heavily punished. So, and one more thing, if you don't know, is that if you stay in Japan for longer than 5 years and you move or leave Japan ever, there is an exit tax. So US has an exit tax for US citizens if you renounce your citizenship. But Japan has an exit tax if you live here more than 5 years. And the exit tax basically is, it realizes all your gains on all your assets at the moment in time. And you have to pay that penalty. And so, of course, you gotta pay. And the taxes in general in Japan is pretty bad. And from what I've heard, the worst combo for financial management or tax management or even citizenship management is have the Japan US combo. That's one of the worst, from what I heard. So, because what happened is there's some areas within a tax code is higher in the US, some are not as high in Japan, and you just pay the higher of the two, and then you pay it worse. And one more thing, if you ever start doing retirement planning, so basically, they don't recognize each other's retirement systems for the most part. So what happens if you open say for example, a NISA in Japan, we're supposed to be similar to like a Roth IRA type of deal. What happened is that US don't recognize that. And similarly, Japan don't recognize US Roth IRA either. So what happened is all the tax advantages you had just goes away. So for a combination of these things, that you need to consider all the financial impact, not just on the living conditions, the cost, the salary, but also the taxes. It's the first time in my entire life I realized how complicated tax can be. I thought tax was complicated already, but when we merge two separate countries, especially if we merge citizenship with U.S. citizen. I mean, I'm not dual citizen, but if you mix tax residency with with outside the U.S. as a U.S. citizen or permanent resident of U.S., it gets very complicated. So one thing to think about, it's almost like there is a very huge incentive for two things: either stay in the U.S. or go to a very tax-friendly states that anything that happens in that state, you're not really paying tax. You just pay tax to US to the IRS. So those are basically the best move, I would say, long term. So for now, just something to know that taxes is a huge deal, and you might not want to be able to continue because of the taxes. And frankly, after coming to Japan, I realized perhaps it might be a good idea to move back to the US for a few reasons, mainly because the taxes in the US is very, very complicated if you merge it with another country. So, yeah, that's something to think about. And tax isn't that important when you don't make that much money. But once you have most of your gains or your income comes from a lot of non-traditional income, that matters a lot. Then tax becomes a huge deal. Because with the traditional W-2 income, it's automatically taken out. Same with work. Yeah, like even the treaty, they waive about $120,000 for a work abroad, which is a small amount of money when you think about it compared to the president of the United States or other things. But these are usually you won't make that much so that trigger it. But once you start becoming valuable as a person, or you know how to invest well, then the taxes can either make or break you. And so it becomes less about the opportunities you want to pursue in a specific area, but more about the government's uh, policies and how the government operates society from a financial perspective. And from that instance, I feel bad for Japanese people who live in Japan, even though they were having the best of the time probably 10, 20, 30 years ago. So again, just be careful for taxes and prepare for all the paperwork if you ever decide to come to Japan.